Hello everybody, this is Alexey Kovazin, President of Firebird Foundation. And today I would like to discuss the biggest configuration error in Firebird SQL. The biggest configuration error in Firebird SQL is using configuration from Classic or SuperClassic on SuperServer and vice versa. So for those who really don't know what is the configuration of Firebird and what is the SuperClassic, Classic and SuperServer, I will do the short introduction. First of all, where we can configure Firebird SQL. There are two actual places. The Firebird conf file, which is located in the root folder of Firebird installation. And since version 3.0, we have databases conf, which allows us to define database specific parameters for every database. Also, we need to check database header for the page buffers settings. How to see changed parameters? If you will ever open these Firebird configuration files, you will notice that it is totally commented. The symbol hash means that the value is commented, and in this situation, when all lines are commented or parameters are commented, Firebird will use default values for Firebird configuration parameter. To see what lines are not commented, you can use these commands for Windows specifically and for Linux. We find this there and grep respectively. Also, starting from Firebird version 4, there is a really good command. Actually, it's not a command, it's a virtual table. It's called RDB config. So you can do simply select all from RDB config and it will show you a lot of information about all parameters, their default values and their actual values. Let's also quickly go through architectures in Firebird. There are three basic architectures in Firebird: Classic, SuperServer and SuperClassic. It is very easy to change architectures in Firebird. Starting from Firebird 3, in order to change architecture, the only thing necessary is to change the parameter in Firebird configuration, parameter ServerMode. You can put it as Classic or SuperClassic, and by default it is Super. In Firebird 2.5 there was separate setup step. There was specific installation command files which help to change between architectures. And also there were different executables. On Windows it was FBServer for Super and FBNet server for Classic and SuperClassic. Also on Linux was FBServer, FBNet server for Classic and FBSMP server for SuperClassic. However, in Firebird 3 we have the single executable Firebird exe, and only change is parameter in Firebird configuration. So let's quickly discuss what is the idea of these architectures. Classic, it is called Classic because it was originally developed many years ago. Classic means that for every user connection we have a separate process which you can see in Task Manager, for example, and every process will have their own cache or page buffers. In Firebird, the cache which is built from database pages also often call it page buffers in several places in configurations and so on. So the more users are connected to the database, the more processes will be running to serve these users. Classic key points are the following. Each connection has its own separate process, and database cache is allocated per connection. Also, as you can see, the consumption of memory will be proportional to the number of connections to the database in classic architecture. SuperServer was invented about 1994, and it implements other model. There are many connections, and all connections will share the same page cache, the same page buffers. So will be one process, Firebird exe, which will have shared cache to access the database. So key points is all connections are served by the single process, and database cache is allocated per database. As you remember, in Classic, we have cache per connection. And if there is one end user application will establish connections to the two databases simultaneously, they will allocate two different processes in Classic. In SuperServer, the process for these two databases will be the single, always the single. However, the database cache will be allocated per database. And therefore, the memory consumption does not depend on number of connections to the database. The SuperClassic was designed as a combination of Super and Classic. It was done in the tempo of 2.5, and originally it was planned as kind of intermediate step to improve the benefits, to use the benefits of the Classic in Super architecture. What is the difference between, or let us say, key points of SuperClassic? The SuperClassic has the single process, but inside this single process there are separate areas, separate chunks of memory allocated per each user. And also this memory, of course, will be used proportionally to the number of connections. So single process by SuperClassic and consumption of memory is proportional to number of connections. That's fine. Memory allocation. If we will see how much memory Firebird will use, there are different methods to calculate memory allocation for Classic, SuperClassic, and SuperServer. In order to calculate how much memory will be used by the Classic or SuperClassic, we need to get number of connections and multiply by the page buffers. In order to calculate how much memory will be used by the SuperServer, we need to simply set page buffers. So, how we can specify the page buffers? There are 4 ways to do it. The first way is pretty rare. It is possible to specify parameter in database parameters block, which is specified on every connection to the database. Example of such usage is iSQL. iSQL has command line parameter where we can specify how many page buffers we would like to use for the connection. But it's pretty rare, and usually makes sense to use it for something like Classic or SuperClassic. Also, it is pretty often when we can see in database header the line, call it page buffers, where there is a number other than 0. If in gstat h output, so just run gstat -h path to the database, you will see the line page buffers, which is non-zero. It means that this value is specified as a database cache for this database. Also, we can specify page buffers in databases.conf specifically for the database. In database.conf, we should specify parameter DefaultDBCachePages for the database where we want to set for the specific database. And in Firebird.conf, the same parameter name DefaultDBCachePages, but it will set the default value for all databases connected. On this slide, I have listed these ways to specify page buffers according their priority. Practically, it means that if you have some value of page buffers in database header, it will override the value set in databases.conf, and it will override the value in Firebird.conf. If you have 0 in page buffers in gstat in the database header, Firebird will use value from databases.conf, which will override the value from Firebird.conf. And only in the case when there is no value in database header and nothing is specified in database.conf, and of course nothing is specified in the connection level parameter, the Firebird will use the Firebird.conf parameter DefaultDBCachePages. What are default values for DefaultDBCachePages parameter for page buffers? They are pretty modest or even low. For Classic and SuperClassic, since version 3, the number of page buffers per connection will be 256. For SuperServer, it will be 2048. How much is it in megabytes? In order to calculate the actual size of the memory, we will need to multiply the value of memory allocation by the size of the database page size. For example, if we have a 16 kilobytes page size in some database and there are 100 connections, it means with the default values, this database will use 400 megabytes. And for SuperServer, the same database, for example, with default values, if 16 kilobytes, it will use only 32 megabytes of memory. Of course, these values are modest. However, the biggest problem comes when we are trying to optimize these default parameters and optimize it wrongly in the incorrect way for the architecture. For example, if we will have page buffers set too small for SuperServer, practically it means for database with high load, it means like 6,000 is really small. You know, the SuperServer and Firebird 3 was designed specifically, developed to use much more memory than default 32 megabytes. We have servers with half of terabyte of memory, for example, and we, or you as a user, want to use this memory efficiently, right? So it means that we need really use much bigger values. So if you set SuperServer value like 1000 or 2000 or something like this, probably performance will be not great, and simply because of the insufficient size of the cache. However, there is also vice opposite situation for Classic and SuperClassic. If the memory set is too high, for example, if you will set 50,000 connections per 50,000 pages per connection, and you will run 100 connections, if 16 kilobytes page size, it will consume 76 gigabytes of memory. Okay, you can say, fine, I have much more memory than 76 gigabytes, and I would like to use all of them. However, there are architectural limitations because the classic and SuperClassic requires to synchronize access to the caches of individual connections through the log table, and the cost of synchronization will become too high, and practically these values will degrade, will decrease the performance. So to summarize, we can say that two small values for SuperServer architecture or two big values for Classic or SuperClassic will be wrong for performance, will decrease the performance. How this problem occur? How does this configuration error occur? There are two basic things. The first is human factor. As you remember, the changing of architectures is really easy. You just need to change one parameter. It is possible that during the optimization, somebody started to play with SuperServer, for example, and increased DefaultDBCachePages to some reasonable values for, or bigger values for their system. Was not satisfied or just decided to try another architecture, changed the parameter ServerMode to Classic or SuperClassic, but kept DefaultDBCachePages. In this case, the Classic will have too big parameter, too big value for memory allocation, and will suffer from described problems. Or another situation, if somebody had Classic configured some value DefaultDBCachePages like 1000 or 2000, and decided to try SuperServer, and it also forgot to change the DefaultDBCachePages according to the architecture. And the second reason of also kind of human factor, but also a legacy factor, when the value of page buffers is overridden from the value set in database header. Why somebody put the value in database header instead of using databases.conf? Well, there is a simple explanation. In the times of 2.5, there was no way to divide resources between databases. And many people have used value in database header of the database as a workaround for lack of configuration. So they used the database header as a place to specify that this database is more important and it will use this bigger number of parameters. And this database is less important and it will use this smaller number of page buffers. When the database was migrated to Firebird 3 and 4, and people decided, to change the architecture and try, for example, SuperServer, often they have the old value in database header which was set for Classic or SuperClassic, which are more performatic in 2.5 than SuperServer. But after the change to SuperServer, this value in database header becomes the real problem, because the administrator thinks that he set everything perfectly. He's calculated the proper value of page buffers for the SuperServer to use several gigabytes of memory, but Firebird will not use it and will override the value of the databases.conf from database header. How we can check the real value of page buffers? If you, for example, if you don't have access to the infrastructure, to the server, you can check this value using any connection like iSQL, for example. or better SQL, because it will directly show you the value of page buffers used for specific query. So you just need to connect to the database with SQL exe. This is a standard tool. It exists in every installation of Firebird. After that, run the command set stat on to enable database statistics for results of query. And then run any query. As any query, we recommend to use select all from RDB database. It's really light, and it will show you in the statistics the line buffers. Here is 40,960 buffers. This is the real value of page buffers of database page cache used in this connection, in this database. Or if you are a lucky user of Firebird 4 or Firebird 5, you can simply run the command select all from RDB config and check parameter DefaultDBCachePages. How to check if we have page buffer in database header? As you understand, this is the most critical point, because when you are configuring something and you will forget to check the page buffers in database header, it will just ruin all the configuration. So do it for your database right now. Do the following. Run the gstat tool. Gstat, also the standard Firebird tool, is included in every Firebird installation. Run with gstat -h, h means header, with the path to the database. No need to specify user or password. And see inline page buffers, where should be 0. If there is other value not 0, it is better fix it to set it 0 and use the values from firebird.conf or databases.conf to configure your databases. How to fix it? How to fix it? There is a command from command line tool gfix, also the standard tool included in every Firebird installation. So run gfix -buf 0. After that, full path to the database. We recommend to use TCP access like localhost if you are running on the local computer. And -users is the password, your password. After that, you need to restart Firebird service, because Firebird will apply the changes on the first connect to the database. And to guarantee that the first connect will reread the data, the easiest way to organize the connection from scratch is to restart Firebird service. So restart Firebird service, and you will see that the number of page buffers have changed to the value specified in your configuration. So we have approached to the recommendations part. The first thing to do is to check the real value of page buffers in your database, as it was described, to guarantee that everything is configured in your database as it should be, and you don't have surprise values like something in database header, or somebody implemented the changed number of page buffers in the DPB block or something like this. When change the page buffers, check the page buffers in the database header and change it if it's necessary with gstat and gfix tools respectively. When you need to use the correct value of default DB cache pages for each architecture. So you remember, it is not should be too small for SuperServer, and it should not be too high for Classic and SuperClassic. But what does it mean too small or too high and so on? Because every system is different, and you can have system with 16 gigabytes of memory or with 256 gigabytes of memory, and of course we will require their specific configuration. The default Firebird configuration runs well until 4 gigabytes of memory. If you have more than 4 gigabytes of memory on your computer, you definitely need to change Firebird configuration to better use the resources of your hardware or virtual machine server. In order to use resources in the better way, you can use the free tool called Configuration Calculator for Firebird. It is available by this link. I was participating in the creation of this calculator, and the idea behind the calculator is to improve the configuration in the way which will not harm, which will not generate any problem. Configuration calculator will generate the good but not the ideal configuration. It will be a bit conservative because when it was created, it was necessary to prevent situation when the created configuration will decrease the performance. But anyway, it will be a really good basis for the further fine-tuning. So start with configuration calculator and you will get a really good initial optimized configuration. The next parameter which I would like to describe is a temp cache limit. But of course I will describe it not in this video, in the next episode. So please subscribe to Firebird mailing, and of course visit our Firebird SQL website to see the news. And in the next video I will discuss the temp cache limit and why it is also not so easy to use, not so easy to implement parameter, but very important for the performance of many queries. Thank you very much for listening. If you have any questions, please address them to Firebird support list here, or ask questions about this presentation, this video, to my personal email ak@firebirdsql.org. Thank you.